Hello, everybody. 5 o'clock on the dot. Welcome. That was my reminder to actually start the event. uh, Glad to see you all. My name is Justin Rivers, Chief Experience Officer with Untapped New York. If you are new to these presentations, we're happy to welcome everyone tonight to our book talk on Patented, 1,000 Design Patents, which actually, as you can see by the title, I've shortened it a bit. And we are happy to have you here. You will be led tonight by the author of Patented and a good Untapped friend, Thomas Rinaldi. I believe Tom also did tours for us at one point. As always, our insiders are here for free, basically. $10 a month for a virtual membership gets you access to all of these great talks and also access to our archives and all events. $15 now gets you access to in-person events and the virtual events as well. Also, I've included a link to purchase a copy of this amazing book, which I have right here, and I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. But we'll talk about that later. You could save 20% with the code SPRING21, and I will put this back in the chat towards the end as well. Please give us a shout and say hello. Tell us where you're viewing from tonight. I'll say a couple of shout outs before I turn it over to Tom. Of course, if you're having any trouble audio or visually with Livestorm, just hit refresh. You'll come right back into the page. And if you have questions for Tom, you can put them in the questions tab and I will be managing those. And Tom and I will have a discussion at the end of his presentation. So hello, Jeffrey from the Upper West Side. Good to have you. You're first today. Pete Tannen from sunny San Francisco. It is hot and steamy in New York today, Pete. Elliot from Las Vegas. Good to have you. Robin from the Berkshires. Waiting for the storms to roll through. It feels stormy. Karen from Turtle Bay. Christopher from Staten Island. Diana, M15 again. Nice. I love it when people join us on the move. Judith, good to see you from Roosevelt Island. Always happy to have Judith here. Lynn from North Stamford, Connecticut. I used to teach in that area. Nancy back in Westchester. And Joe from Wintry, London. Very different, Joe. All right. So without further ado, I turn it over to Tom. You guys are in for a real treat. Tom, I will see you at the end.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Justin, thumbs up?
You're good.
All right, here we go. Thanks, Justin, for that introduction. And this talk, as Justin mentioned, is related to a book of mine that's just come out from Phaidon called Patented, 1,000 Design Patents, an Unprecedented History, as well as an essential field guide to more than a century of fascinating product and industrial design. So what we'll do is kind of talk through what the book covers, and a lot of this talk is going to be devoted to kind of what drew me to this subject and how I got into it and what the kind of process for putting all of this together was. And I expect it to go maybe 45 minutes or so, so we should have time to hopefully do some questions at the end. So please definitely put those questions in the chat for us to catch up with at the end. Okay, so let me see here. All right, here we go. This project, you might say, began a long, long time ago when I was a little kid, about 10 years old in upstate New York. One Sunday morning, my mom and I were in the Grand Union parking lot, the supermarket, and suddenly there was this flea market that had never been there before. And this little cathedral radio caught my eye that's on the kind of top right of this picture, the one that's kind of brightly lit. It was $5. My mom loaned me the $5. It was a wreck, but I loved it. I fell completely in love with it, and my mom and I kind of tried to restore it together. It sparked an interest that has stayed with me all these years in things like this. You can see on the shelves next to it some friends that it's made. It now lives in my parents' basement, still in upstate New York, just a few miles from that parking lot. Hasn't gone very far. The years went by after this, and I became interested in other things, and some of those interests wound up kind of spawning a couple of books. First, in 2006, I co-authored a book called Hudson Valley Ruins with Rob Yasensak, and this book looks at historic sites in the Hudson River Valley of New York State that have in common that they are threatened by neglect or are abandoned. 6 years later, I came out with another book called New York Neon, which looks at specifically neon storefront signage in the 5 boroughs of New York City, all of it before a certain date of about 1970. And in thinking about what these two books had in common, well, there were several things. I mean, one thing was kind of an interest in built things and human-made things as they are sort of affected by time, by the passage of time, the passage of time giving rise to things of a very different character, but then taking those things away also. But there was another kind of common theme that these two books had that I find a sort of continuation of with my interest in patented. With Hudson Valley Ruins, Rob and I were looking at historic sites, as I said, throughout the Hudson Valley of New York. And one thing these sites had in common was generally that they were kind of underappreciated and undervalued. This is a site that maybe some people watching this might recognize as the Hudson River State Hospital, which is up in Poughkeepsie, a few miles away from that Grand Union parking lot. Rob and I, over and over in doing this book, found that these sites were not just kind of cool, fun places to explore or picturesque ruins to photograph, but also they had this great design provenance. They were, in many cases, some of the most important buildings architecturally in the region. And it turned out, for instance, the Hudson River State Hospital, seen here, was designed, the grounds by Frederick Law Olmsted, the buildings by Calvert Vaux, and Vaux and Frederick Clark Withers. Am I getting the name right? I'm just having a senior moment. Vaux and Withers. In any case, the same designers who gave us Central Park and Prospect Park, the Jefferson Market Courthouse, for instance, here in New York, among many others. This is an abandoned railroad station on the waterfront in Newburgh, New York, which I was thrilled when we discovered was the work of architects Warren and Wetmore, who were the co-architects of Grand Central Terminal here in New York. So these buildings were kind of architectural cousins. The kind of grand finale for the book was this building, which maybe some people recognize as the Yonkers Power Station in this photograph with the Hudson River in the background and the Hudson line of Metro North. Amtrak trains also pass by here to this day. This was built by the other co-architects of Grand Central Terminal, a firm called Reed and Stem. And it turned out to be very much, again, another architectural cousin of Grand Central. So kind of making these discoveries about the design provenances of these buildings, gave us a chance to kind of, really make the case for these buildings that these were, important places and kind of worthy of being better appreciated. We looked at things besides just buildings, though. This is a car ruin, if you will, that's off Route 9W near Catskill in upstate New York. This is a 39 Buick. And in describing these couple of sort of non-building ruins that made it into the book, we wanted to do the same thing and kind of talk about their design provenance. For this, we were able to identify General Motors' longtime director of styling, Harley Earl, as the person who could be credited as kind of the sort of mastermind of this and other General Motors products at that time. But one that we couldn't figure out a designer for was this, which was an old former New Haven Railroad locomotive that was up at Croton Harmon on the Hudson River in what was called the Deadline, which was this lineup of old equipment that was waiting to be scrapped and has since been scrapped. So we were able to kind of talk a little bit about, when this was made and where it was made, but I wanted to really kind of figure out, well, who designed this thing? I mean, we were not able to do it back in 2006 when Hudson Valley Ruins came out. For the Neon book, it was very much the same kind of conundrum for me. Partly was to try to, really sort of be able to talk about where these signs that I was photographing in New York, simple storefront signs, where do they come from design-wise? And this was, as difficult as it was to find designers for some of those ruins in Hudson Valley Ruins, this was much more difficult, as you might imagine. Some of the signs had these little makers' placards on them, which gave you kind of a clue as to who made them. But even then, how much did this really tell you about, kind of how they were designed and who actually designed them? In a few cases, I was really lucky to kind of really be able to get to the bottom of this. This maybe some of you recognize as the Papaya King sign, which is up on 86th Street, 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, still there, was made in 1964. And for this, I was able to really kind of meet the maker. who still had the design drawings for the sign, but this was really the exception to the rule. I thought I could maybe figure this out by going into buildings department records. For instance, I was able to track down the buildings department record for the Smith's Bar sign, which is still around on 8th Avenue and 44th Street, I think, in Manhattan. It has not lit up since last March, so I'm a little worried that the pandemic may have done this one in. But this was one of very, very few that actually you could just sort of see this kind of cropped snippet of the buildings department records here that actually gave you a manufacturer's name. Usually this slot for manufacturer for the sign turns out to have just been left blank. So it was, in any case, suffice it to say, a very difficult thing to do. So my interest in kind of figuring out these little sort of design puzzles, transcended obviously buildings, and signs were of interest too. But going back to that radio that I picked up, say, in the parking lot, things like that were, of kind of the same level of interest to me. And so for years and years, I just sort of accepted that, oh, well, that's basically unknowable. I mean, how, apart from certain, very well-known objects, like these famous tulip chairs by Eero Saarinen, who was, the designer's name was actually here in the advertising. And these are at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and many other museums too. Things like this are of a known design provenance, but these, again, are sort of the exception to the rule. I mean, most of the things that we're surrounded by in the way of furnishings and other objects of industrial design, it's really, we'll never know, is kind of what I sort of took for granted. But then through the years, I kind of discovered different resources, a little bit here, a little bit there. And anytime I did, I sort of made note of them and tried to kind of track these different resources a little bit, not with any particular goal in mind, except to just sort of accrue as much information as I could, almost out of idle curiosity. So there'd be resources like Industrial Design Magazine and other trade publications, which, to give you sort of a sample of what you might find in Industrial Design Magazine, for products like these sort of this coffee maker and other kind of kitchenware, Industrial Design Magazine might happen to have some of that, be able to kind of give you a bit of the design history of those objects when they were new, say. But this is, Industrial Design is, the magazine is a pretty obscure resource. This is something, I don't even know if I could have got my hands on it up in Poughkeepsie. It was on the open stacks of Avery Architectural Library here in New York City, and I was able to kind of get access to it there. But it's since been moved off-site, so you can't even get it there. It's pretty much the kind of a resource that, let's just say, is not all that easy to come by. And some of the others are typically even more obscure. But as time went by, anytime I did find something like this, as I said, I sort of made note of it. Back in 2011, the post office released this set of postage stamps, which are called the Pioneers of Industrial Design series. And this very much excited me. Now, some of the designers in this set are names that are probably familiar to everyone or almost everyone here with us today. Henry Dreyfuss, Raymond Loewy, for instance, are names that you don't have to be an academic to know, to be familiar with these names. But there were other names in this set that were new to me at the time when these stamps came out, like Peter Miller Monk. I'm now sort of embarrassed to say was a name I didn't know. Who else? Dave Chapman was a name that I didn't know back then. And I saw these stamps and I thought to myself, I should know, all of these people, and I should have an idea of, as somebody who's interested in this subject, I should, sort of know what they were about and what their bodies of work were about. But to kind of give you a sense for just how obscure this subject really is, and how difficult it often is to kind of really get to the bottom of who designed some of these objects, we need look, in fact, no further than these postage stamps. This is the stamp for Henry Dreyfuss. Henry Dreyfuss, one of the best-known industrial designers of all time. This is the Model 302 telephone, which was what they decided to use as the sort of most iconic of Henry Dreyfuss's known designs. Well, the problem turned out to be, in fact, that Henry Dreyfuss didn't design the 302 telephone. This was kind of taken for granted that everybody said, oh, the 302 telephone, that's Henry Dreyfuss. It turns out it wasn't so much Henry Dreyfuss. Dreyfuss had a long relationship with Bell Telephone and did design many other things for Bell Telephone. But in this fantastic article, which was published by Russell Flincham and Ralph Myers in the Winter Third Portfolio a few years ago, they really kind of got to the bottom of exactly what Henry Dreyfuss did and didn't design for Bell Telephone. So anyone who's interested in this subject, I highly recommend tracking down this article. We now know that the 302 telephone was not designed by Dreyfuss. Well, in fact, it shouldn't have been all that surprising, really, to find out that Dreyfuss didn't design the 302 telephone, because one need have looked no further than the design patent for the 302 telephone to see that Dreyfuss is, in fact, not named anywhere on it. But this now is by way of kind of pointing out, in fact, just how obscure design patents are, or at least have been for a long time. They're documents that when I first started running across them, I didn't quite understand. I didn't know what they were telling me exactly. Did it matter that Dreyfuss's name didn't come up on the design patent for the 302 telephone? Well, in fact, it turned out it did matter. And if I'd understood what design patents were a little bit better, I might have even known that before I came across the Winter Third Portfolio article. But so patents, we'll talk about now the distinction between design patents, which are the subject of the book, and utility patents, which are what most of us think of when we hear the word patent. As I was kind of just idly Googling these various different kinds of things that interested me through the years, more and more, starting really kind of in around 2010 or so, patent documents would come up in my Google searches. And so, speaking of Henry Dreyfuss, this is what probably many of you recognize as the streamlined steam locomotive that Henry Dreyfuss designed for the 1937 iteration of the 20th Century Limited, which was the kind of grandest train to connect New York and Chicago at that time. A sort of very famous in the kind of canon of objects of industrial design, and everyone who is a passionate of this subject knows as Henry Dreyfuss designed the 20th Century Limited of 1937. Well, the patent document here doesn't name Dreyfuss, so you might come across this as I did and think, well, what is this telling you? Okay, it doesn't have anything to do with really the design provenance of this work of design. It's telling you sort of maybe how it's assembled, or it's sort of that kind of thing, those sorts of details, but not so much about okay, who actually was the designer of this. But then I'd come across patent documents like this, which is for the same thing, which does name Henry Dreyfuss. And so it kind of wasn't immediate. Again, I'm sort of almost embarrassed to admit it, because to people who are more immersed and have been more immersed in this subject, either as design professionals or maybe patent attorneys or patent agents, this is very much old news. But to me, of course, patents, we all sort of know what a patent is. A patent is meant to sort of protect an invention. I didn't realize that there was this whole other category of patents alongside utility patents. Utility patents are what we think of typically when we think of a patent that's protecting an invention. But there's this whole category called design patents that were established many years after the patent system was first established in this country. We'll get into that a little bit in a couple more slides. The first kind of tip-off that you're seeing a design patent versus a utility patent, you need to look just at the number. The utility patent here on the left is a much higher number. This is 2,200,000 something. The design patent number over on the right is 116,180. It also starts with DES for design. You'll also sort of notice that the utility patent is sort of a lot more technical looking. They're both pretty technical looking drawings, but the utility patent drawing has all these little key numbers on it, whereas the design patent has really, it's just the drawing. If we were to see the full document, you'd see that the utility patent on the left has many, many pages and additional drawings that go with it. It's a much beefier, lengthier kind of a document. The design patent has only one accompanying page of text, which is pretty much just kind of a couple of paragraphs of boilerplate text. Once I kind of figured this out, that there was this distinction, now sometimes some objects do have both a utility patent and a design patent that both name the same person as being the author, designer, or inventor of that particular item. And looking back at Saarinen's tulip chair, which we saw a few slides ago, this is one that happens to name Saarinen as both the inventor on the utility patent, and inventor is the same term, but really the designer he's credited as on the design patent. But this is sort of happenstance when that happens. The utility patent may or may not be telling you who designed this thing. The design patent, on the other hand, is meant to be telling you, okay, well, who actually is the designer of this particular article of manufacture, to use the patent office parlance. Here's just another example. This is a radio that was made by Sears Silvertone in the 1930s, designed by Karstadt is the name of the designer, Clarence Karstadt. The utility patent for this very same radio doesn't give you any mention of Karstadt. So utility patents may or may not, in fact, be useful for giving you information about something's design provenance. But design patents there's this whole category of documentation that is enormously helpful for design historians. So here's just a quick look at what a design patent actually does tell you. This is a design patent that I was thrilled to find for this little kitchen timer that probably everybody watching this recognizes this little kitchen timer. I bet a lot of us actually own one. I know I certainly do. The design patent for this and many of the other things that are covered by design patents will tell you the name of the person or persons who actually designed this thing. In this case, Frederick Lux and Helmut Bierbaum. In this case, but not all cases, they'll tell you who the sort of sponsoring company was, which is most often the manufacturer, but not necessarily the manufacturer. In this case, the Lux Clock Company of Connecticut. It gives you the date that the application was filed, 1951, and the date that the patent was issued, in this case just a year later in 1952. So it's a pretty good kind of reliable baseline of information that you get for them. There is a third category of patents, which we won't talk about except to acknowledge that they exist, which is plant patents, which have had really beautiful color drawings that came along with them. They were intended to patent new varieties of plants, but just to kind of know that they're there, we won't talk about them apart from that. To get into the history of the subject a little bit, so the idea of having patents for things goes back to the Middle Ages. Patents became really kind of institutionalized as a legal apparatus in England at the time of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, when the United States government was being kind of dreamed up at the end of the 18th century. A lot of our legal institutions were modeled after those of England, including the idea of legal system for patents. The idea of patents was, a lot of us sort of just kind of think of patents as being there to make sure that an inventor gets his due or her due for having come up with an invention. But it's not just that. In fact, really, a large part of the reason for being for patents is to kind of make sure that someone's invention is out there and known about to be developed further by other inventors. This is the case for utility patents and for design patents, and I guess for plant patents too, alike. So the inventor will get his or her due monetarily and otherwise for that invention by way of patents, but really the kind of bigger intent there is to, for a given country's community of inventors to be able to continue to build upon each other's work and to continue to kind of develop sort of say industrial prowess of a particular nation. And that was the idea behind patents. So utility patents were institutionalized in the United States in 1790, so right after the signing of the U.S. Constitution, and were around for 50 years before design patents were instituted by a new patent act in 1842. So utility patents were great for protecting the way something worked, which was what their intention was. But manufacturers increasingly, as the Industrial Revolution was taking off, if you were suddenly able to really mass produce something, say you were making a cast iron bathtub, for example, you wanted to decorate that particular object, you could do so by way of casting something and just making many copies of it suddenly. Whereas before, say a table leg or something would have been something that would have to be individually kind of crafted by a craftsperson. Now you could just make the design once and then copy it ad infinitum. And so because of this, suddenly an object's design was of much greater importance and was going to really have a monetary value and affect the sales of that particular thing. If not its function, say people might be more drawn just to the better looking object. So manufacturers naturally suddenly had this interest in protecting the design of their products. But utility patents weren't really geared to that kind of legal protection. So certain manufacturers began kind of lobbying to institute a new kind of legal apparatus to protect design. And in 1842, that's what they got. I sometimes wish that they hadn't been called design patents. I wish they'd used a term besides patent, because it certainly confused me that there were these two different kinds of patents. I include this slide by J.L. Mott because Mott, which is a well-known name here in New York City, there's Mott Street and a lot of cast iron buildings associated with the Mott Iron Works. Mott was one of the leading agitators for the institution of design patents back in the 1840s. The first design patent was actually for a typeface or a font, but there's no image known to be associated with that design patent. The second, I think, was for an oilcloth floor covering, which also I could not find an intelligible image for. But design patent number 3 is for this girandole, because I guess candelabra wasn't a fancy enough word. But it gives you a sense for what the kinds of objects were that were being patented back at the very beginning. Number 6 was actually for a corpse preserver, interestingly. So these were some of the earliest design patents. There's a lot kind of made of the aesthetic of patent drawings, and this was kind of certainly a factor in my own interest in them and in putting the book together. The early patent drawings could be, and where you find them, they could be in color. They're often, they have a lot of kind of interesting character. They were less regulated in terms of how they needed to look. In fact, if we pass that slide, yes, I wanted to mention back here in looking at the history of patents that for anyone who's really interested in a deep dive on this, this is a screen cap from a YouTube video by my friend Matthew Bird at Rhode Island School of Design, who has a great, if you look him up, History of ID for Industrial Design on YouTube, is a great 45-minute deep dive into the history of patent drawings, which kind of susses this out a lot better than I'm going to be able to do here. But he talks about there a bit how early patent drawings, as I mentioned, were kind of much more, in a sense, much more interesting and much more artistic, and had all these colors in them and everything else. What happened was in 1873, the Patent Office instituted more rigorous requirements for how patent drawings had to look. And this was partly because of the way the drawings were going to be disseminated. So as I said, part of the whole reason for being of the patent system was to promote people's inventions. And so part of the legal requirement mandate for the patent office was to circulate the patents that they were issuing. And long before any form of kind of electronic communications, the way they did that was by way of weekly gazettes in which they would print illustrated lists of the patents that have been issued in the past week, with some selected patent drawings. So it's not a comprehensive issuance of every single patent drawing that's been filed, but they were, so what they did in producing these was to reduce the size of the original patent drawings to a relatively small fraction, maybe something like, I think, 1/8 of the original size. So the requirements for the drawings were that they be drawn in such a way that they could withstand that reduction in scale and still be intelligible. So no two lines in the drawing, for instance, could be closer than, I think it was, I can't remember, like 1/20th of an inch or something, so that when they were reduced, they could still be read. And so that is kind of why patent drawings, both utility and design patent drawings, look the way they do. This is kind of a quick study. So patents are, it's a world of crazy statistics. And I did some statistics, some statistical analysis of my own in looking at this. This is a quick graph that kind of shows from 1900 to present the issuance of utility patents versus design patents. And you get two things from this at a glance, one of which is to see that design patents are issued at about, consistently have been issued at about 1/10 the rate of utility patents. So when we're looking at that utility patent versus design patent, and the utility patent at a much higher patent number, well, that's partly why. I think now it's something like 10 million utility patents have been issued. They just passed a milestone number, whereas for design patents, I think they're at about 900,000 now. Another thing to take note of is just how exponentially they've been growing in recent years. This chart looks just at design patents, and one of the interesting things that kind of this one shows is how the number of design patents spikes as you get to the 1930s, about a third of the way across this, and then kind of dips down at World War II. But interestingly, doesn't get back up to the number of patents being issued at the time of the 1939 World's Fair. They didn't get back up to that number again until the mid-1980s. And that, to me, was indicative of the kind of explosion in the interest of the design of products that took place in the 1930s, which is often been called the design decade, the 1930s, which is it's thought of as the kind of the time when industrial design became sort of crystallized as an organized real profession. People would tell you that industrial design in theory has been around much longer than that, but the 30s was kind of considered the real kind of golden age. Another interesting thing you can sort of glean from looking at patent issuances is you can see patents issued to applicants of nationalities outside the United States. And this is just a quick chart looking since 1990 at issuance. This is looking at England, Germany, Japan, and China. And in this little snippet, you can kind of see something very interesting happening with the line across this chart for China. Just got, for the first time, 20,000 patents issued to Chinese nationals, I think, in the year 2019. And this is a number that is continuing to rise, which I think is just kind of an interesting little statistic that speaks to the phenomenon of globalization. So having kind of got familiar with the idea of design patents, everywhere I went, I started to see things, and in the back of my head, the design patent would pop up, or I'd either already know about it, or I'd say, I wonder if I could find that. This is a place that, again, I think probably a lot of untapped people are going to be familiar with, Dead Horse Bay, out kind of on the fringes of Brooklyn, near Floyd Bennett Field on Jamaica Bay. To make a long story very, very short, basically an abandoned garbage dump or landfill that's kind of been spilling out onto the beach where the bay laps up onto all of these different things that fall out of this landfill onto the waterfront. Been there since probably the early 1950s or so. I hope that all of you have already gone because technically you're not supposed to go there anymore. But in any case, on one visit I made some years ago, here are a few things I spotted. This rusty metal object turns out to be a bathroom scale made right there in Brooklyn, patented in 1933. This I recognized as a Carter's inkwell, patented in 1938. It really sort of looks like it could be something out of the 39 World's Fair, which took place not all that far away from there. And this, which is possibly to many of us a very recognizable object, was a tape dispenser designed by an industrial designer called Gene Reinecke, who I've come to refer to affectionately and reverently as the king of the tape dispenser, because tape dispensers by Gene Reinecke have probably been on all of our desks at one time or another. And what I started to see, if I went to a place like Dead Horse Bay or to a flea market somewhere, was what I started to refer to as this kind of invisible web of connections that tied all of these different objects together. And so here are these three things found on the beach at Dead Horse Bay, kind of fit into this sort of theoretical grid. The vertical alignment here represents works by the designer Gene Reinecke. The horizontal lines are by typology. So the top line is bathroom scales, the middle line is tape dispensers, the bottom line is inkwells. And in this kind of way of looking at things, Gene Reinecke becomes almost like the Kevin Bacon of industrial design. Like everything is kind of connected to each other through Gene Reinecke, at least in this particular little case study. Gene Reinecke is somebody who I had never heard of before. If we were in a room together, I would love to ask for a show of hands of how many people were familiar with Gene Reinecke. He's somebody who's definitely not unknown in the world of industrial design, but outside of the world of industrial design, his name certainly doesn't have the kind of recognition that like Henry Dreyfuss or Raymond Loewy would have. And yet he turns out to have been one of the most prolific designers in the history of design, period. This is just a kind of a grab bag, which unfortunately looks like the image quality suffered a little bit on this one, but of design patents that I just quickly, at random grabbed from the many, many design patents that Gene Reinecke racked up from the 1930s through the 1970s. He had a very, very long career. And some of these are things that you may or may not recognize. The tape dispenser, again, king of the tape dispenser, up at the top right there is something that I bet all of us have, probably all of us have at least been in the room with one of these, if not actually had one on our desks at some point. This was my grandma's toaster, for instance, here next to it. So it's kind of interesting, again, that invisible web, to suddenly be able to look at these things and realize that there's this connection between my grandma's toaster and the tape dispenser that was on my teacher's desk in fourth grade, or something like that. Here again is that series of postage stamps. So what I started to do in kind of looking at design patents, so there's 900,000 design patents have been issued up to now. What I started to do was kind of to say, okay, well, I can't look at all 900,000. So how am I going to kind of get into this rabbit hole and be able to have a meaningful experience from doing so? And the process that I kind of worked out for myself was to establish certain starting points. So each of the objects in this, on the postage stamps, for instance, would be a starting point. So I would look up every design patent that was issued to every one of the designers on these postage stamps, and then also try to gather together every design patent that had been issued for every object of those typologies. This is just one of many starting points that I kind of established for myself. And in so doing, you'd find these kind of interesting intersecting points. One of the problems in doing this was, so this was now made possible from the time of the patent gazettes. We've now reached an age of Google Patents and other online searchable databases of patents, where they've gone from being very hard to find and obscure, you had to be in a research library somewhere, to you can just do this anywhere, you can do it on your phone. But there are limitations. So Google Patents, great as it is, relies on OCR scans for PDF documents. And in this case, this is a great example of what happens with these scans, is that George becomes, I can't even attempt to pronounce what that would be. But you see here kind of a very typical pitfall of Google Patents. So I had to kind of find workarounds to kind of get around these little hiccups. But I wound up with my own personal database of something like 30,000 patents in the course of doing this. And to go back down into my parents' basement upstate, I could now look at these shelves of things that I collected, and boom, suddenly know that that Black Zenith radio was a Robert Duvall Budlong radio from 1952, or that Little Red GE has its designer able to be known, or this one that my mother's coworker gave me a million years ago. It turns out to be the work of Jack Morgan, who's another, like Gene Reinecke, prolific designer whose name has been largely forgotten today. And remember this guy from Hudson Valley Ruins in 2006. Well, if only I had known about design patents back then, I could have told you a lot more about the design provenance of this particular thing in the book. So in the course of doing this, I found a lot of very interesting things. Donald Deskey is one of the names on those postage stamps, a name who's probably quite familiar to any fan of Art Deco architecture in New York City. Certainly he's associated with the interiors of Radio City Music Hall. That I knew. I did not know about Donald Deskey's Moth Killer tablet, for instance, from 1946, or the pool table that he designed. It turned out he had a contract with Brunswick Billiards and designed a series of pool tables and racks for pool cues and things for them. William Lescaz, it turns out, also was a designer, was a pool table designer, besides being a well-known international style architect of the 30s and onward. Gio Ponti, Ponti's bidet, was another of my favorite discoveries. Gio Ponti, the Italian designer and architect, turned out did a whole suite of bathroom fixtures. This one, unfortunately, has due to issues of the image quality, did not make it into the book, but I did get Ponti's bathroom sink into the book. You found the good, the bad, the iconic, the canonical, and the completely ridiculous. This is one of my favorites from the ridiculous pool. This is unfortunately not one that is in my parents' basement. If I ever find this somewhere, a lot of these things, it turned out, were in fact not actually manufactured. It's hard to believe that something this great was not manufactured. There was one character that I came across in looking through all the design patents for TV sets, for instance. This guy, Jack Borofsky, who I've yet to find anything out about, but so the internet might not have anything to say about him except for this trail of design patents that Jack Borofsky left behind from the mid-century decades. This is one of several crazy designs for TVs. Could you imagine? Thought I'd seen some crazy TVs in my time, but Jack Borofsky took the cake. This is another interesting Jack Borofsky design for a kitchen range. Again, I have no indication, nothing to indicate that either of these were actually put into production, for better or for worse. The quality of the drawings themselves, in some cases, was pretty lackluster. They're pretty straightforward drawings, and the Patent Office has these standards since 1871 that really are kind of meant to keep all of the drawings as much as possible showing you things in an apples to apples kind of a way, which helps the patent examiners when they're looking at a patent application to know whether this is something they can grant, or is this something that's too much like something else that they've already granted by way of a patent. So the patent drawings have, there's multiple reasons for why they have the aesthetic that they do. But even within those strict parameters, some incredible drawings have been produced. This is for a concept car from the mid to late 1950s by an industrial designer called Brooks Stevens, who's a name that might be familiar to some of you. He's one of the designers who's somewhat obscure today, but does in fact have a monograph that's been published in recent years of his works. Another one of my favorite patent drawings is this one. This is for a radio that was produced by the Crosley Corporation of Cincinnati, Ohio, by a designer called Carl Reynolds Jr. And I have seen Carl Reynolds Jr.'s works, in fact, misattributed in, of all places, the Cooper Hewitt Museum. Things that there are, in fact, design patents for. So to kind of, again, emphasize that idea of how valuable and underestimated design patents can be as a research tool. But more than to talk about Carl Reynolds, I show this just to kind of give you a great example of a patent drawing that is just such a spectacular little drawing in its own right. This pointillist approach was something that the patent artist was able to do within the parameters, the strict parameters of the Patent Office Manual for Patent Examining Procedure, which is what dictates how those drawings look officially. So the idea came to mind to do a book of these, which would be mostly an active curation, but also kind of a handy guidebook. And it was partly something that I thought, I would get a lot of use out of on my desk. And I made this little mock-up as far as to sort of pitch the idea. And my thought was just to have these little like thumbnail drawings, and you'd get 1,000 of them together, and you'd have yourself a 200-page book with 5 per page. Well, I didn't like the idea so much that they decided that they could do 1 per page. So here's the book as it is now. And I have to say, I've had this now in like physical form now for just about a month or so, and I find myself pulling it off the shelf a lot, which is, for me, of course I hope that people like it and get as much out of it as they can. But for me, it's proving to be very useful. So like, I'm happy. I'm constantly pulling it off the shelf to say, oh, who is that again? What was that design? Who did that? Here are just a few others. I wanted in the book to have as many things as possible that would be recognizable to anyone. I wanted someone to be able to pick this book up and open it up almost to any random page and be able to see something they recognize, but on the page next to it, ideally, to see something that they didn't recognize necessarily. I wanted to kind of juxtapose the iconic and canonical works, the known works, with the less known works. Or if it was a known work, but maybe something that you had no idea who actually had designed this thing. And here is, for example, the kind of archetype of the VHS tape, which was introduced by JVC way back in 1977. Here's one that if we ever go back to our offices again, I've been going back to mine, and so I'm seeing this thing on a daily basis almost. This is the Keurig coffee maker, so we go right up to present with these things. I was thrilled to be able to find the design patent for the famous orange-handled scissors. This is the orange-handled scissors by Fiskars, the Finnish scissor company. Now, not everything has a design patent. It's one could only kind of estimate, do a pure guesswork for how many what percentage of manufactured things actually do have design patents. What we do know is that there's 900,000 design patents. There, are a lot more than 900,000 things that have been produced that could have design patents. But the orange-handled scissors, thank goodness, have their design patent. This thing, which anybody of my generation is going to recognize the first generation Nintendo. There is, of course, this, which is certainly, I think you'd say, a modern canonical work. But as excited as I was to find this, I was perhaps more excited to find this, which friends of mine will recall that I held on to one of these a lot longer than anyone rationally could have. Again, the canonical and the less canonical. So here's one that's canonical with something that we might not have thought of as being from the canon. This is not something that I don't think you'll find represented in the MoMA's collection. The design for the Pizza Hut building from 1965. Here's one that is pretty instantly recognizable to people my age, I guess. Certainly, the Back to the Future DeLorean. And so what I'm doing now with this is I have this Instagram and trying to every day do a slightly deeper dive into one of the designs. They're typically from the book, but sometimes I pull one that up from the cutting room floor and give you a little bit of background in the post about the particular kind of object of the day. It winds up not being every day because, again, it's I kind of can't help myself. But this was today's, so I've been kind of picking them based on the date of their issuance and doing like an anniversary. This is a telephone that is not yet in the basement. This is the automatic electric model 183 Spacemaker telephone of 1959. I had never really kind of like done the deep dive on this to kind of look it up. And it turns out that its designer, E. Burton Benjamin, is one that I had not traced to see what all of his design patents were. But so I did so in preparation for this post and found that E. Burton Benjamin has something like 45 design patents to his credit, issued from the 1940s up through the 1980s. And so if we know nothing else about E. Burton Benjamin's career, and I'm sorry to say I could find nothing else out about his career, he seems to be a fairly obscure character. We know about 40 things, at least, that he can be credited with their design. One of those things really kind of blew my mind, which is this really cool phone booth, which about 10 days ago, I was walking down, I think, Water Street in Lower Manhattan, and in one of the office plazas there had run across this thing. Now, it's interesting to find a phone booth of any kind anywhere out there in the wild today, but much less this, which I thought, that's quite a phone booth there. And now, as of today, because of the Spacemaker telephone, we know a little bit more about the design provenance of this, which, in any case, is the kind of thing that keeps me coming back to design patents. So I hope that this book, if nothing else, this project kind of can impart on people who pick it up a little bit of this fascination that I have with these things, and what it's kind of done for me, and I hope it'll do this for others too, is I can't hardly look around a room now without having everything sort of come alive in this way, and I start to think about I see things I know and recognize and things I don't recognize, and the things I don't recognize I wonder what I can find out about them. But that invisible web I am sort of always thinking of how one thing is related to another thing, and across divides of typology and chronology, things that I never really appreciated as having a relationship with one another. I now kind of either know that they definitely have a relationship, or imagine that maybe by some connection with Gene Reineke, they are related somehow. So in any case, that's it. Thank you very much for coming, And Justin, we'll see if we have some questions, perhaps.
We do. We have a couple questions, and great story. So that telephone booth, by the way, that you showed a couple slides ago, is at 77 Water Street, and the architect's daughter of that building is on this talk.
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, I think she's still here. She was ducking out at 6. Are you, Robin? Are you still here? Yeah, she's typing. So that's a Richard Roth building.
That's amazing.
And he was very good friends with Mel Kaufman, who commissioned him to build that building. And there's a Sopwith Camel recreation plane on the roof of that building that has a grass runway that says 77 on it. It's a great building.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's other interesting stuff in that kind of covered plaza.
There's the candy shop, and there's it's a really great building. And Richard was saying that the Kaufman did not want a lobby, so it was all open air. It was an open air lobby. Yep,
it is. I called it a plaza, but that was because I was, sort of reaching for the right words.
Yeah, no. It's a great. Robin just said it's a great building. He hates lobbies. So we do have some questions. This is an awesome talk, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start from the top of the questions tab, and we'll just go to the bottom. Joe Holmes asks, "This is a bit left field. Do you follow Stooping NYC? If so, you will have seen this ear-shaped dressing table popping up all over town. I wonder if you know the origins of that design."
I do not. I do follow Stooping NYC, and I'm a frequent contributor to them. And I've seen the weird ear-shaped thing. There's an article that was just published in, where was it published? There was like a little article about this, and anyway, it's a fascinating story. Anyone who can and it has not yet checked this out, if you go to the Stooping NYC Instagram, it's one of the first things you'll see in their recent posts. And there's this like whole really interesting story about these weird objects. I don't have the design patent for that. I wonder if I could find it.
All right, there's a challenge.
Great sort of design patent project, in fact.
Yeah.
Know what I'm doing?
I love it. All right. Judith Birdie just asked, how long does it take to get a patent?
It can take, anywhere from a couple of months to a couple of years. And historically, you'll always be able to see patent issuance dates versus when the application filing date. And there's always a lag. And historically, the lag has gotten, I think, a little bit longer through time. But given the volume of applications that the Patent Office is coming in now, it's amazing to me that they're able to keep up at all. For utility patents, it's a longer lag than it is for design patents, typically. For design patents, I would say, if it's not a very contentious kind of a design, it could be issued maybe the next year. But there are some that I find, and I'll notice that there was, just when I noticed, I'm trying to remember what it was, where there was like a 4-year lag or something for what seemed to me to be kind of a simple design. And this goes back some decades. So, I'm not sure what the holdup was there. But yeah, it does take some time.
Alan asked, did you cross-reference items in the Washington, D.C. Museum of American History? I would think many items are displayed.
So not specifically the Washington, D.C. Museum of American History, the Smithsonian American History, but I would go to shows at the Cooper Hewitt and, just like kind of round up everything that was there, for instance. Different, books, monographs, there are books like Industrial Design A to Z and, classics of industrial design. Fiden has some of those. Taschen, another publisher, has similar kinds of books. Anything like that I got my hands on, I pretty much took and ran with, yeah. But the Smithsonian American History Museum is a great one that I've not been to in far too long, and so thank you for that reminder. Another reason to get back down there. Yep.
Great. Karen asked, are there sources beyond Google to research patents?
Yes, there are. And some of them are better and some of them are worse. And they're typically, Google tends to be the most user-friendly of them, except that it's so buggy. It's very buggy. I mean, I'll go into Google, one day and do a search, and like the next day I'll search the exact same thing and get different results. If you search on, it depends on what computer you're using or what web browser you're using, you get different results. So it's really, it's just very, very buggy. Some of the other ones, like one website I use a lot is Free Patents Online, and they're a bit more reliable, but they don't have, you're a bit limited in what you can search criteria wise through them. So yeah, the short answer is yes.
Okay. Free patents. What was it? Free patents?
Free Patents Online.
Online? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try to look that up before we go to put a link in.
Yes.
Glenn asked, are there references between design and invention patents?
References between design and invention patents. If I'm understanding the question, then yes. The answer, I believe, is yes. The text that comes with a design patent is still a lot shorter than what is issued with a utility patent. However, it's gotten a bit more sophisticated and more comprehensive. And design patents, utility patents too, will typically reference today, recent years, the last 40 or 50 years probably, they'll specifically reference other related patents, and they will reference utility patents as well as design patents.
Okay. So Pete Tannen asked, can we get a link to the 302 telephone article?
Oh, it's an Instagram. It's an Instagram post. It's
okay. On your Instagram?
Yeah, if you go to the Design Patent Daily, it's today's post. And
okay.
Let me tell you, I had a beastly time fitting that word count in.
I bet.
Rather annoying things about Instagram. But in any case, there's a 2,200 character article about the space saver telephone there, yes.
So Pete, I put the handle in the chat for the Instagram, and it's right there. Oh, it's like staring me at the face.
Yeah, and I hate, I don't want it to be like you have to have Instagram to see this. So if you don't have Instagram, you don't feel like looking at it, we'll get it to you another way. I could email.
Yeah, you could send it to me, and I could pass it on. Pete, let me know if you have Instagram. Lynn asked, did you delve into the history of the patent office itself?
I did as much as I could. I made contact with the patent office, and they have like PR people. But what I really wanted to find, and I couldn't make contact with these people, unfortunately, and I think the pandemic played a role in that, was, I imagine this must be like a real bastion of dorks. Like, that as a card-carrying dork. I think there would be a lot of kindred spirits in this place. Like to the hilt. And I know there have to be, people at the patent office who are, really immersed in and steeped in the history. I mean, this is a government agency that's been around since 1790. So, I was not able to make contact with those people. And, the emphasis for the book was really kind of on the designs themselves and the act of curation. But I do in the introduction get into, as much as I could, the history of the agency, but it is something that really warrants a 1,000-page book with that's all text. It is pretty fascinating, and if you like statistics, I mean, it is a very statistic-rich sort of world there.
Yeah. Alfred Eli Beach was a patent officer. He's one of my favorite guys of New York history.
Oh, the pneumatic subway guy?
Train, yeah.
Oh, thank God I got that one right.
Yeah, you did. Good job. No,
That's Jeopardy for me today.
Yeah, he's great. That's a whole other thing.
Oh, yeah.
Judy says, go to the American Art Portrait Gallery to the top floor, all 19th century balconies and decor, worth the trip. Lynn asked, your favorite patent. You knew this was going to be asked, right? You knew that.
You know what? I would say that out of the 900,000 that have been issued so far, I would hope that my favorite one, at least I rounded up into the 30,000 that I shortlisted. And of those 30,000, there were 1,000 shortlisted for the book. So those would be 1,000 of my favorites. Now, of that 1,000, the Carl Reynolds radio that I showed earlier is one of my favorites, and I just love the way I do love the design itself. That's another one that's not in my parents' basement. So if anyone has an extra one, please reach out. But I love that for the design. But the quality of the drawing, I also just astounds me. One sort of frustration of design patents is that they do not give you the name of the patent artist anywhere. So the patent artists, could be the industrial designer, but probably are not typically. Mm-hmm. Typically, they're professional patent illustrators, patent drafts people. So there's a series of designs that were all issued for that same company, Avco, which was the parent company of Crosley, that must have all used the same artist, because they're all this, really beautiful approach. And there are drawings for kitchen ranges and refrigerators and a series of radios all designed by the same guy. And they're spectacular drawings. So it's a question that if you ask me tomorrow, I'll probably give you a different answer. But
that's a tough question. It's always hard to pick your favorite kids. Yep. I will say this: I have the book, and one of the things I love the most about the book is its shape. And so I'm very tactile with books. I love books because of the way that they look and they smell, and of course the information within. But I just love everything about it. I love the shape. I love the size. I mean, look at this.
I like that
see that?
It stands.
It stands anywhere. It can stand. It's standing right now. Right.
You don't even need a shelf.
You don't need a shelf.
French version. You don't need a shelf for this book.
No, it's great. And my favorite thing, full disclosure, is I'm a big fonts guy. I love fonts. I love to see the evolution of the fonts and the design of the patents themselves as you go throughout the years. And the other thing, I'm going to give a big shout out to, which I thought was genius, by the way, Tom, was the evolutionary case studies. I thought that was great.
Yes.
Love them.
Yeah. So, in organizing the book, it was, do you go by typology or do you go chronologically? And, this was definitely a discussion that was had very early on. My idea from the beginning was to go chronologically, but it was always this temptation to go by typology. And so we gave into that temptation.
Yeah.
Kind of front matter section where we did 10 kind of evolutionary case studies. And then it was, which 10 do you do? We didn't do radios, for instance, which just about killed me. We were going to do bicycles, and I think, we wound up doing clocks instead of bicycles. Anyway, it winds up being very, very cool. Yes.
Yeah, it's really great.
And we could talk about fonts too sometime because, for the Neon Signs project.
Yes, that's right. We really should do that. Because we would have a high nerdery event.
Absolutely.
And you can certainly drive the conversation, but I will. And I know Michelle is a fonts fan too. I think that's one of the reasons why Michelle and I became good friends initially. Well, Penn Station was, and then fonts. So I think we could have a really great amount of fun with that. All right. I think we have one more question that came in. Actually, we have two, and then we'll end for the evening. Lynn asks, next book. So, next project?
Hopefully something.
Okay. That's good.
Hopefully. God
Stay
willing,
tuned, Len.
don't rise. I'm going to have to let you know on that. I don't have an answer yet.
Okay. No problem. And then Glenn asked, and I'll make this the last question for the evening, are there controversies with design patents similar to patent trolls?
Yeah, the short answer for that is yes. I can tell you, I don't know if it's so much design patents. Yes, certainly. They are very much the subject of legal challenges. And, that was kind of, the point, in a sense. There have been many problems that have come up that where it turns out that the patent in fact could not really settle the legal dispute. It turned out to be kind of a flimsy, not a too flimsy of a document, where patent examiners maybe issued a patent for something they shouldn't have. There was a patent issued for a Henry Dreyfuss designed alarm clock that was then later invalidated, and the patent was actually taken back. I look at this design and I think it's a very distinctive design. I mean, I haven't read the kind of the casework on this, but I'd be really kind of interested to know exactly what was at play there. But I mean, maybe the most kind of controversial one, a design that gets trolled a lot, is the Raymond Loewy teardrop pencil sharpener, which is the design that was picked to be the representative Raymond Loewy design for the postage stamps. And a friend of mine is a design historian and really kind of thinks that is just is a crap design. That design got totally ridiculed in its day. Henry Dreyfuss later, and Henry Dreyfuss and Raymond Loewy are very different kinds of people. And I would really be interested to know more about their relationship. You kind of would expect there were such different kinds of people that they would be kind of like arch enemies, but they always at least had this public sort of friendliness towards one another, and spoke, well of each other. But one place where Dreyfuss kind of let things, drop a little bit was with that teardrop pencil sharpener, which he kind of subtly ripped in a book he wrote in the 1950s. So that's one, and there is a design patent for it. It was never actually produced. There's a prototype floating around out there somewhere, which I think just sold at auction for like $85,000 or something. It's probably the most valuable pencil sharpener there is. But in any case, that's one that gets trolled a lot. I don't know if I should even say how I feel about it. I'm hesitant to. That's that controversial. I think it's okay. I think I'm fine with it. It's in the book.
We won't consider that on the record, although this is recorded and will be made available to our insiders. But, all right. Well, Tom, again, thank you very much. This was awesome in many, many ways. Not only your presentation, but of course, Q&A was also fun afterwards. Again, I'll put, I hope I have it one more time. I do. There is the link again to buy the book to get 20% off with the code SPRING21. Please do so. The link is in 3 spots here. Also, if you are on Instagram, follow @DesignPatentDaily. And any final thoughts, Tom, before I sign off for the evening?
Oh, just thank you, everyone. Thanks for being a part of it.
Thank you very much. Insiders, next week we have the creation of the Sing Sing Museum on Tuesday. We also have in-person events now more so than ever rolling in. We've got Marble Cemetery on Sunday. So if you're around and want to come to the Marble Cemetery, please do so. And then I believe Photographica is next week as well. You will not see me next week. I am taking a research week, so I will not be hosting events, but I will miss you and see you the week after. All right, everybody. Have a great evening. Again, thanks, Tom.
Thank
and
you.
Go out and purchase the book. All right. Stay safe, everybody. Have a good one. Good night.